This is the second of the Islamic Studies Initiative speaker series. We're very grateful to Mr. Omar al-Askari for providing the funding for this series. The theme of this year has been Quran. And I'd also like to thank the Muslim Students Association and Laurie O'Halloran from the Global Studies Institute for doing the administration. Today I'm very happy to welcome Professor Shady Nasser. Dr. Nasser is Assistant Professor of Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations at Harvard University. He teaches courses in Arabic literature as well as Islamic civilization. His previous lectureships or postings have been at University of Cambridge in classical Arabic studies. And also he was at Yale University where he directed the Arabic program from 2009 to 2012. His research interests include the Quran, with a particular focus on the history of the transmission of the text, its language, and its reception among the early Muslim community, pre-Islamic poetry and early Islamic poetry, akhbar literature, so historical literature, and hadith transmission. And his recent publications include the transmission of the variant readings of the Quran, the problem of tawatur, and the emergence of the shawaz, from Brill in 2012, and a couple of articles that I just picked out of a long list include Quran 12:2. We have sent it down as an Arabic Quran, praying behind the lisper. That's from Islamic Law and Society. And as another one, the grammatical blunders of Quran reciters, Zallat al-Qari by Abu Hafs al-Nasafi, and that was in the Journal of Abbasid Studies. Professor Nasser today is going to speak about the canonizations of the Quran, from Ibn Mujahid to al-Azhar. Dr. Nasser, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks.
If I need to speak loudly, just let me know. This is fine? Okay, you can all hear me in the back? Okay, good. Okay, thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here, and thanks for the hospitality. You know, I'm well fed since yesterday also, you know, and I had a great tour also around the campus. You know, thank you so much for that. The research, this research topic is a little bit technical, and of course we will not be able to go into technical details, but those of you who can follow up with some of the Arabic that I'm going to show, please feel free to ask me, you know, after the lecture. I can, you know, go into detail. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain the major problems we have in this kind of discipline, what we work on, what I work on, and why actually we are interested in the transmission of the text. Okay, so what are the research problems that we are facing? Why in the past 15, 20 years there's a robust movement in Quranic studies in general, but particularly in the transmission of the text and the history of its reception also among the Muslim communities. So first I will start with the word canonizations, which actually we don't have an equivalent in Arabic for it. So we really don't, some attempts in Arabic try to translate canonization as qawnana, for those of you who know Arabic, but actually it's really a wrong word. Mostly qawnana comes from qanun or laws like standardization. But canonization, we picked it up from biblical studies in a sense that you have a corpus of things and you choose. Okay, and then this is how you create a canon. And more or less, that's the process of the transmission of the Quranic text, that we had a corpus of what we call different readings and different systems of readings. And over time, over the past, let's say, 1400 years, really, since the inception of the Quranic text, the Quranic text passed through many stages of canonizations. Some of them were subtle. Some of them were very obvious and recorded and written down in the historical documents. So again, the word canonization here, it's roughly equivalent to what we call standardization, but it's really about picking and choosing. And what we study is we try to understand why certain readings or systems were picked up and other systems were removed, or other systems were considered to be non-canonical or non-standard, and other systems were considered by, you know, certain communities and certain groups to be standard, or what we call Quranic. Another point also before we proceed is that today, if you want to study the Quran, if you want to recite it, if you want to memorize it, professionally, of course, you take a certificate, what we call in Arabic or Islamic studies, ijaza, right? It's, you know, the master gives you a certificate to recite or to transmit and to teach also to other people. And you choose between, there are 10 systems that are now considered to be canonical or standard. And if you study the Quran, you have to take a certificate in one of those 10 systems. There are no systems beyond the 10. There used to be more systems back in the days in the 9th century, 10th century, 11th century, but these systems died out. And today, only 10 systems survive to be what we call canonical. And all these systems are equal in the Islamic tradition, meaning that they are all considered to be divine. They are all considered to be Quran. If you read in the Kufan tradition, for example, it's as good or as Quranic as reading in the Damascene tradition, as in the Meccan tradition, etc. That being said, most Muslims today, they are used to roughly or more or less one specific reading, which is dominant since the 60s or since basically the mid of the 20th century. And because of certain reasons that I will explain now, a reading which we call Hafs an Asim, which is also an Iraqi Kufan reading. That's what we are familiar with. Okay, so this is how, if you grew up in the Muslim world or in the Arab world, we study according to one codex, which is based on a Kufan tradition. However, there are 4 other codices which only professionals and Quran reciters they are familiar with and they know. And I will quickly go over these now. So that's what I mean by canonizations, and these are the systems in the transmission of the Quran. Ibn Mujahid, I will talk about him now. He is the first person to come up with a system of 7 readings, and this was in the 9th century. Okay, so he died 324. And al-Azhar, we all know the institution of al-Azhar in Egypt, and they were mainly responsible for coming up in the 1926 or 27 with the first printed edition of the Quran. And they picked one system, one reading out of the 7 or the 10 different systems, and they voweled the Quran according to that system. And this is why in the Arab world and the Muslim world, mostly we are familiar with this reading due to the efforts of al-Azhar in spreading and circulating this specific reading and recitation. I will start with a quick anecdote, as I usually start. I like this one. I usually talk about it. What are these different variants in the Quran? And are they textual? Are they phonetic? Are they due to dialects? Do they affect the meaning of the verses? Do they not affect the meaning? What kind of omissions, additions we have? Are they similar to other variants we have in other scriptures? If some of you, those who do not know Arabic, Arabic is a Semitic language. It has a consonantal script, and the old Arabic script, before it was given diacritics and dots, it was something like this at the very top. So you just have a consonantal outline without any dots, okay? And this is the Arabic script. It has been like this for probably a couple hundred years, after, let's say, the collection of the Quran. And then later on, Arabic grammar developed, and they put the dots and the diacritics, and now it's very easy to read standard Arabic without guessing what is this word, what does this word mean, unless of course from context. So the anecdote is Hamza bin Ali, he is one of those 7 readers, which we call them the eponymous readers, the 7 canonical readers. And if you want to study the Quran today, you can go and pick up the reading of Hamza al-Zayyat or Hamza bin Ali. So according to the anecdote in the biographical dictionaries, it says that Hamza wanted to become a master of the Quran. So he said, I don't need a master, I can do it by myself. So he started publicly reciting, and then he started with the first verse of the Quran, which is this one. This is from Surah Al-Baqarah, right? So ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ, and then, which means this is the scripture whereof there is no doubt. So if you put the dots like this, it becomes raib in Arabic, which means doubt. However, he made a mistake, and he read it this way. And he changed the dots because right? This is the scripture whereof there's no oil, right? And of course, he realized that he made a grave mistake. People gave him the nickname Hamza Zayyat, which means, the person who made this mistake about changing Graib to Zayd. Probably he was an oil seller, and the anecdote is probably fabricated just to, tell you that you cannot study the Quran by yourself. You need a master. Yes, please. Yeah. This Hamza, he is 2nd century Hijri, that's 8th century. So this is 8th century, so beginning of the 8th century. So he is one of the 7 canonical readings. If you go online, or if you want to know those 7 systems, he is one of the 3 Kufan readers, the 3 major readings, and his reading is canonical, is Quranic, is divine in the Islamic community. So based on that, basically, he is now Hamza Zayyat, and as I said, probably the anecdote is made up, maybe it's not, but that's not important. The important thing is to tell you that you cannot read the Quran by yourself. You need a master, and that's how the Quran functions. You always need people to teach you how to read the text, because there are things that you cannot, guess by yourself. Now, what are these 5 or 4 stages of canonization that I'm talking about? So I will give you here a very rough outline of the process from the beginning until the 20s. So we, 632, okay, 11 Hijri, 632, the Prophet dies. And as I always say, this is one of the mysteries that we try to answer. Some people came up with good answers, other people didn't. We are still speculating. We know that, the Prophet, his basically prophetic career spanned over 21 to 23 years, right? And the revelation was always coming to him until, he died. One of the questions that we ask ourselves, why didn't, and the Prophet did not die suddenly. He knew when he was dying, he predicted it, he performed the last pilgrimage, and he did not collect the text, okay? He didn't. We have some accounts, they are weak really accounts, weak in terms of, from even the Islamic tradition, that he probably had a prototype of the Quran. He told some people to write down some verses, to change the order, but we really don't have solid accounts of the Prophet collecting the Quran and coming up with a text, okay? So that's, let's say, a fact that we don't have. Even if he did, of course, we don't have this collection. So the Prophet dies and the text was not collected together. So we have first, the first caliph and then the second caliph. They were busy with the wars and establishing the new Islamic government. And then the third caliph, Uthman, and this is what we call the major collection of the Quran, happened during his time. Okay, and this is the year 47 Hijri, Islamic calendar, around 656. So this is roughly 30-something years after the Prophet dies. Okay, so now according to the major narrative, the Quran was collected, around 35 years after the Prophet died. And this is what we call the first collection. So this is not canonization. This is still a collection of the Quran. The Quran was spread. It was written on different forms, on different parchments, on bones, on leaves. And then I will show you now the 2 stories of the major collections, and I will quickly summarize them. Uthman collects them, not himself. A committee did that. And this is what we call today the Othmanic Codex, right? So if you open the Quran and you read al-Mushaf al-Uthmani, which means that this is the collection of Uthman, because there were other codices by other companions that we don't have access to. They were destroyed, they were burned, and the codex which survived is the Codex of Uthman. And this is why it's called al-Mushaf al-Uthmani. So after that, we have here between the year 656 to 936. This is almost 300 years, okay? And the first 200 years, this is what we usually call like the formative period of Islam. We really don't know much about it from that period. We only have writings from later period, from later historical sources about what was happening. We don't have really writings from the 1st century and basically mid of the 2nd century Islamic calendar. And during that period, we do know that there were many reciters and many scholars reading and reciting the Quran in so many different ways, okay? Not even according to 7 systems or 10 systems. They were reciting the Quran and according to one compilation to 50 different systems and readings, okay? And this was, of course, too much. So you are establishing, this is the new religion, you are establishing a new government, you need a constitution. And you can't just like have 50 different versions of one divine text. You need to limit these variants. So this man came, Ibn Mujahid, which is in the title, and he compiled a book which is called The 7 Readings, As-Sab'a fil Qira'at. And he said, well, out of those 50 plus different systems of recitations, I'm going to limit myself to only 7. And his canonization, this is a canonization process where he neglected the 43 different systems, and he chose 7 systems because of different criteria that we are still trying to figure out. But what helped him is that he was politically connected. So he actually was connected with the court, and he forced people who did not follow his system to actually go to prison. So there were other reciters and other scholars who disagreed with him, and they said, no, why are you limiting yourself to those 7? And he said, well, this is my opinion, you have to follow me. He was connected with the Wazir Ibn Muqla by the time, and then the Wazir, anyone who disagreed with Ibn Mujahid's systems, they tried them, they put them in prison, and then if you don't follow Ibn Mujahid's system, you are not reciting the Quran properly. And they would either repent or they would follow Ibn Mujahid's system. And it became basically a standard since then that people would follow the system of the 7, what we call right now. That being said, of course, after Mujahid ibn died in 324, scholars still disagreed with him. Why did Ibn Mujahid do this? 7 readings. We have so many wonderful readings out there, and this man is very trustworthy. Why did he neglect his reading? So scholars still transmitted and recited Quranic readings and systems beside those 7 systems. And with time, until basically, I will talk about this in a moment. So after here, so 833, so also 500 years later, this man comes, Ibn al-Jazari, and say, well, I'm not content with 7 systems. I'm going to basically compile 10 systems. And this is what we call the system of the 10 readings. 7 of those systems are the same systems of Ibn Mujahid, but he added 3 more. And he said, well, I do think that those 3 readings are also good, and they are standard, and we should include them in the system. And you know, right now, again, we still have people who are reciting according to those 3 additional readings, and you can take a certificate also with the sheikh or with the religious scholar, and they are considered all to be equal, Quranic, and valid. Okay? Now, between these 2 periods right here, we have this very important period, and this is North Africa, Muslim Spain, right? And this is al-Dani and al-Shatibi. They were both from Andalusia. And what they did is the system of the 7, what we have right now, yes, it's because of Ibn Mujahid, but if it were not for al-Dani and al-Shatibi, we actually wouldn't have the system of the 7, because they were the ones who popularized the system. So al-Shatibi, he wrote a very famous poem, okay, and he summarized all the different variants of those 7 readings in the poem. And since that time, if you want to study the Quran, you have to memorize this poem in order to get your certificate. So even today, if you want to memorize the 7 variants of the Quran, you memorize this poem, and what we call al-Shatibi, and this is the manual of the different readings. And al-Dani, what he did is that al-Shatibi, he wrote the poem based on a manual that al-Dani wrote. So al-Dani simplified the book of Ibn Mujahid. He said, well, this is too long, it's 800 pages, there are too many variants, it's too technical for the student, so let me simplify it for just the lay Muslim who just want to know what are the different variants. So al-Dani wrote this short manual, it's just like 90 pages, and it's almost like a table of the variants. So this verse, you read it this way, this word, it's read in 3 different ways. Al-Shatibi came and put it in, you know, he versified this manual, and it became so popular because people, even scholars, the material is very complicated and technical, even for Arabists and, you know, scholars of Islam. It's very deep in philology and grammar, and people really, when they read Ibn Mujahid, they don't understand what's going on. And this is why these people popularized the tradition, and it became accessible to people who are able to memorize the poem and know, oh, well, this reading is this reading is that, because I memorized the poem. And as some of you know, poetry and everything in Arabic tradition functions based on poetry. It's like didactic poems. We have poems in prophetic traditions, in medicine, in logic. Everything is, you know, it's easy to memorize if you have a poem in front of you. And what also these people did is that each of those systems, you would think that, oh, okay, fine, we have one system and it's one reading, but actually it is not. Each of those 7 eponymous readers, they had different disciples, okay? And each disciple actually was reciting something different from his other classmate. So you would have, let's say, a professor who is the eponymous reader, and he had, like, you know, 15 students. And then the 15 students will go and say different things. And they'll say, you know, the professor is saying that. But then those 15, they really didn't agree on everything. So they would have, let's say, a 20%, you know, differences in what they are saying. So what al-Dani and al-Shatibi did is that, okay, we are not going to take what those 15 students narrated from the eponymous readers. I'm just going to take 2. Okay, so 2 out of 15 or 20. And this is what we call the canonical rawis, the transmitters, developed during that period. Again, and it survived until today. So if today you want to recite the Quran or memorize it or have a certificate in it, this is what we call Hafs an Asim. So Hafs is a transmitter, and Asim is the eponymous reader. So if you want to do the Quran, you don't do Asim. There's no such thing as Asim. There's Hafs an Asim. So Hafs on the authority of Asim. The other reading is Shu'ba, for example, Abu Bakr Shu'ba. You say, okay, I want to memorize the Quran or transmit it or recite it based on the transmission of Shu'ba or Abu Bakr from Hafs, etc. We have the Medina tradition, for example, Warsh. Okay, say Warsh an Nafi'. Nafi' is the eponymous, the boss, right? And Warsh is the disciple. So there's no such thing as the reading of Nafi'. There's a transmitter on behalf of his master. But we do have different transmitters, but those traditions died out, and only those 2 transmitters survived. And this is because of, these 2 men right here, right? The 4th transition, this is not actually a official, it is an official, of course, canonization process, but I call it a 4th canonization because what al-Azhar did in 1923, and followed also by the first audio recording in 1964 of al-Husari of the Quran. The first audio recording was based on that specific reading, which we are all familiar with now, is Hafs an Asim, right? And what al-Azhar did in 1923, they printed the Quran and they voweled it based on that specific reading. And since that time, most Muslims and most Arabists, and this is how, when you grow up in a Muslim country, you read the Quran based on that, unless you are in a very specific, regions in the Arab world. For example, let's say in Libya, they would still follow the Basran tradition, okay? In Medina, still until they do both Hafs and Warsh at the same time. Also in North Africa, they do Warsh, which is a Medina also tradition. But most people are familiar with that specific tradition, which is Hafs an Asim, which is different. I don't want to say very different from the other traditions, but it is different. And what al-Azhar did and what most people followed, this is because due to that first printed edition, which became available to everyone, everyone would buy the Quran and would have access to it, and it's based on the reading of Hafs an Asim, that specific reading out of 7 systems. And if you want to also divide it into 7, 2 from each one, you have potentially 14 different systems. So if you go to a specialized institute with that print codices for you, you tell them, give me a codex based on the reading of, let's say, Warsh, and give me a codex based on the reading of the Basra. And then you will have on the first page or the second page written, this is the al-Mushaf al-Sharif, okay, the noble, Quran, based on the reading of Hafs or based on the reading of Warsh. You would read that. You would have it basically written on the Mus'haf. Okay, if for specialized institutes like Majma' al-Malik Fahd, for example, in Saudi or in Egypt, they do that. Okay, but if you just go to a bookshop and you get a Quran, you will most probably get just that edition, which we are all familiar with. So that's roughly the layout of the 4 stages, okay, of the canonization. Now, in Islamic tradition. Now, of course, what are the problems now here? The problem is that in the Islamic tradition, the process of transmitting the Quran and receiving it is basically roughly, my graph is so bad, so forgive me for that, just like very simplistic. But the idea is that the Prophet received the revelation, okay, from, not directly from God, right, through basically Gabriel, right? So the Prophet never spoke with God directly. It's always through the mediation of Gabriel, who recited the Quran to him, and then the Prophet recited it to the Muslim community, to his disciples, right, to the companions. And so this is here, different transmissions, and basically, allegedly, the idea is that all of them received more or less the same transmission. And the Muslim community, which are the disciples of the Prophet back then, they also transmitted that Quran orally. We are talking about oral transmission here. There's no written transmission. So this is all memory. You memorize it, you recite it to the others, and people, there was no writing system, was very minimal back then. The companions of the Prophet also transmitted it and recited it to their disciples, which we call the successors, okay, or tabi'un. And the same process happened, over and over and over. And this is what in Islamic tradition we call tawatur. And tawatur means that the Quran was transmitted in such a way that it is impossible for divergences or differences to happen within the text. So it was transmitted, it's like something that is known for everyone. When you say, for example, the sky is blue, this is something what we call in Arabic mutawatir. Everyone knows the sky is blue in the morning, at least, right? Because the sky is blue. Like, can anyone tell me like the sky is green or, I don't know, purple? No, the sky is blue, or the sea is blue, or something like that. So, or, I don't know, the sun will rise tomorrow. It's just like, this is mutawatir. This is, everyone knows that. It's taken for granted. And the same happened with the transmission of the Quran. That's, the Quran was transmitted to the whole community, and it's known to everyone that it is transmitted through this mechanism, that there's no such way. People cannot just, collude on error or fabricate things, because it is known to the whole community. So that's the idea. However, when, of course, we're not now talking from our perspective, even from the perspective of medieval Muslim scholars, when they looked at the different codices of the Quran and what we call the different variants, they said, okay, well, wait a minute. So why do we have these variations in the text? Why do we have textual variations? Why did some of the companions of the Prophet have different codices from the main codex, of Uthman, okay, the third caliph? Why do we have dialectal variations? If the Quran is the word of God, does God or did God speak in dialects, for example? Okay, so did he go and recite to the Prophet one verse according to the dialect of the East, and then next day he recited to him the dialect from the West? So Muslim scholars, they were trying to understand like, these variations. What are the sources of these variations? Are they divine? Or people came up with these variations, and they are all permitted, or we have a license to read in these different variations. That being said, if we do have license to read in different forms, why some variations were accepted and other variations were rejected, right? And that's what scholars over the past, let's say, 1,200 years, since basically the canonization process, they were trying to understand, why do we have these variations? Can we come and recite again to variations which are considered to be non-canonical or not standard? Or is it only the standard variations that we can recite? Now, what are the implications of that? Yes, you can basically now, I can come and recite something which is not canonical, but that doesn't mean anything. The important thing is a liturgical space. So if you want to pray, you have to pray and recite the Quran according to those 7 different systems. You can't pray and recite something outside those 7 systems. So that's basically the crux of the matter here. It's a liturgical text, and it's where you recite it and when you recite it. However, if we are sitting right now and then we are here and then I tell you, well, listen, this is in not a non-standard recitation that some guy from Egypt recited, that's okay. Muslim scholars recorded that, and they wrote everything down, and they were very keen on collecting all these what we call non-standard readings, and they were actually trying to come up with more readings. So they were not really hiding away from the fact that there are different readings of the Quran. The most important part was, when do we use these readings? Are they for exegetical purposes? Do we understand some verses better if we refer to some other readings? So that's where the usages of those readings were very important for Muslim scholars. But if we recite the Quran while during prayers or during pilgrimage or in a public recitation, we have to follow certain systems. And what we are trying to understand, why certain systems were rejected and other systems were accepted. So I'm going to go to this afterwards. Just like these are the two, basically, two major narratives of the collection of the text. I put the Arabic next to the English, just like so that if you want to look at it. Even the narratives of the collection of the Quran during the first collection and the second collection, they do, many scholars tackled them and they pointed out, I underlined, in the English part, the problematic pieces, historical problematic issues in the accounts, and why do people try to challenge these accounts? Are they fabricated? Were they later on, written, and people forgot the details? For example, one of the interesting parts here is that here, this part right here, which in English, it says, for example, when the first collection of the Quran took place, the man who was responsible who was the head of the committee, put this in parallel with the idea that the Quran was transmitted to everyone, and everyone knew all the information or all the Quran, and it was mutawatir, as we say. But then in this account, and this account is the official narrative, this is from one of the canonical traditions of the Bukhari. Okay, so this is the canonical account of the transmission of the Quran from the Muslim tradition. It says that there were 2 verses from the Quran that he did not find with anyone else, and they were only with one specific companion. Okay, he's relocating the parchments and poems from the memories of man who knew it by heart, and then I found with Khuzaymah, that's the name of the person, 2 verses from Surah At-Tawbah which I had not found with anyone else. Okay, again we have to ask ourselves, so why these 2 men had 2 verses from the Quran that no one else from the companions of the Prophet had? Okay, so what happened to the idea that the Quran actually was transmitted to everyone and everyone knew the Quran by heart? If we are, again, talking here from the Islamic perspective, we are not even going out. So we compare this account with the other accounts from the Islamic tradition, we find contradictions. And what we try to understand is, why do we have these contradictions? And which narrative, is this narrative before the narrative that the Quran is transmitted, to everyone equally, or it's the other way around? Or it's a vicious circle and we really can't know which one came before the other. And the other also interesting part of this account is when they collected the Quran. So first the only copy was with Abu Bakr, the first caliph, and then when he died, the copy stayed with Umar, the second caliph. But when Umar dies, or when he died, the copy did not go to the third caliph. It went to his daughter, right? And that's also very intriguing, because we are talking here about a constitution, which should stay, let's say, with the caliph. It goes from the first one, the second one, and it goes to the third one. But then when the second one died, it did not go to the third caliph. It went to his daughter, as if the whole matter, transitioned from, a governmental, if you want, space into individual place. Where why the daughter of the caliph would possess this codex and would not pass it or give it to the third caliph, which should be the case. And then if you compare, of course, with the second account, which is what we call the official canonization of the text of the Quran during Uthman, Uthman sends a messenger to her and tell her, please give us the copy that you have, okay, and let us copy it down. And this is where the first copying or the first codification of the Quran took place. And then Hafsa, she was the wife also of the Prophet and the daughter of Umar. She sent them the first sheets, they copied it, and they made multiple copies. And then he gave it back. Of course, we don't have these sheets of Hafsa or the first codex. They are lost, or maybe they never existed. And also those 5 different copies that from the time of Uthman, also we don't have access to them. They either never existed or also they were lost. And this is basically a justification of what we call the 5 different codices. So we have the main codex, which is from Kufa in Iraq. And the second codex is from Basra, also from Iraq. Okay, they are different. They have differences also in vocabulary, in syntax, etc., and particles. And you have a codex in Mecca, you have a codex in Medina, right? And you have a codex in Damascus in Syria. So these are the 5 major codices. And in Kufa, you have 1 codex, but there are 3 different readings on Kufa. And this is what makes 7 in total. So 3 from Kufa, 1 from Syria, 1 from Mecca, 1 from Medina, and 1 from Basra, and these are 7. Okay? So these 2, or basically this account, is a justification of why we have different readings and different variations in the text. Now, before I get to this, let me quickly, since I show you, where is it? No, sorry. Oh, right here. Sorry, I skipped it. It was right here. Okay. So this is a typical, what we call ijaza, a certificate, right? And if you see here, always in any certificate, if you, hopefully in the future you will study the Quran memorized by heart, and you will get something like this. But this is the certificate of one of the famous Egyptian reciters, Abdul Basit Abdul Samad. And you will find here, I will translate the Arabic, and the whole certificate, it tells you, well, this person studied with that person, with that person, with that person, just like a list of the professors, right? And then at the end here, it says that, and he read it or he recited the Quran with this companion who studied the Quran or transmitted it from the Prophet. The Prophet, and this is the name of the Prophet, so okay, so there's a Prophet, he took it or transmitted from Gabriel, okay, directly from the angel, and Jibreel from al-Lawh al-Mahfuz, okay, which is in heavens. Lawh al-Mahfuz is basically a tablet, you know, it's, you know, we don't really know, the Quran is inscribed on it, okay, so it's in heaven. And the Lawh al-Mahfuz, which is this tablet, is from the qalam, the pen, okay, and the pen is basically from God. So basically God spoke or, you know, recited the Quran to the pen, which we don't know actually, it's a pen, let's think of a pen, and then it's the tablet, and the tablet Gabriel, and Gabriel to the Prophet. Okay, so this is the mechanism of the transmission, and this is how in the certificates or in the way in the Islamic tradition, that's why it's very important that the Quran is the word of God, and there's a specific mechanism of receiving it, okay, for to the community. Now these images are they are allegedly like one of the codices that Uthman, the third caliph, compiled. This is from Egypt. But we already know that they are replicas, right? So there are some research done on them, and they are replicas. But even if they are not genuine, actually they probably were good replicas of what could have the original codices looked like. Okay, so as you can see, it was very expensive to write the whole Quran. Okay, so all these, like, it's like now you can have a Quran which is like as small as this, but it's very so this is why you say, why 5? Why not make 100 copies? Well, you couldn't have made 100 copies back then. It's very expensive to come up with, and paper was not discovered back then. So paper, they brought paper from China 150 years later. So back then they were using parchment and leather. So it was really very expensive to embark on a project like this. It's like the first computer, probably, you know, how much it would cost you to come up with something like this. And also the Arabic script, as I told you earlier, you don't need to know Arabic to see that there's a big difference between something like this and something like that. So this is the script today, fully voweled, you know, with full diacritics. You read, and there's no problem in reading it. However, these are the early parchments or the early manuscripts that we have of the Quran, and they are just consonantal script. They don't even follow the spelling system that we have today. And unless you study this thing, you can read it. Otherwise, you cannot read it, even if you're an Arabist. Okay. Okay. So now next, I want now to play a video for you when we talk about the variants. This is the opening chapter, okay, we call it Fatiha, and this is recited, this is known by all Muslims, you know. All Muslims know it by heart because you use it 5 times when you pray, okay, so whether you are like 2 years old, 3 years old, or like a 70-year-old man, everyone knows this. It's a very short surah, and it's known by heart. Now, the interesting thing about this chapter is that, like other chapters in the Quran, that it shows many variations, okay? Textual, phonetic, etc. And this is, I put here basically the basic transliteration and how the Arabic sound like. But the video I'm going to play here is by an Egyptian reciter, Salim Antar. His name is Salim Antar. And actually he died. He was the last Azhari, Egyptian, basically Quran reciter to have an official certificate in reciting non-standard Quranic readings, right? So after this man died, and I found this on YouTube, someone uploaded it, and people who know Arabic or who know this will basically recognize that really this is really, like, people used to recite this way. Before I start here, anyone wants to read this for me in Arabic? Anyone here? No? No one? You guys can read? Can you read the... just al-Fatiha, just like, yeah, from not from here, just like from your memory. So just, yeah, you don't have to do a beautiful recitation. Just like speak it out, yeah. See, so it's just like, you know, you recite it. It's everyone knows it by heart. It's you know. Okay, so now if I tell you, for example, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, if I now tell you instead of Alhamdu, Alhamdi, what would you tell me? You studied Arabic grammar, right? Yeah. So if I tell you instead of do, di, what would you tell me? Do, yeah. It's like Alhamdu. This is how you studied it, right? But if I tell you di, it's if I'm now reciting in front of you, and then, so would you correct me? Would you tell me no? It's Alhamdu. Alhamdu, but not Alhamdu. Alhamdu is wrong. Why? Well, there's no preposition before it, right? So you would say, well, there's no preposition. Why are you saying? Sorry for those of you who don't know Arabic, but you need a preposition to make a genitive, right? So genitive construction. So if it's not a genitive construction, you say u, right? But then I'm starting with the word, you know, this one here. See the first one? I'm talking about this one here with him, right? So this is the first word here. So it's do. There's no preposition before it. There's nothing. So in Arabic, when you start a word like that, it's nominative and say u. But if there's a particle before it, you would say e, right? And there's no particle before it. So I tell him, can I say alhamdi? He said, no, you're wrong, okay? You can't say that. However, if you go to classical manuals of recitation, you have people who actually said di, right? And that's, again, we think about Arabic grammar. So why did they say di? And what kind of, like, when did the rules of Arabic grammar, you know, became standard? And why they standardized it according to one system and not to the other systems, right? So I'm going now to play this, and sorry if you're not an Arabist, but I just want the people who know it. But I want you to see how he recited it in less than 10 seconds, but just see how he keeps reciting it also and come up with different variations. So, yeah. Oh, actually, just give me a second. Sorry. Let me plug in this right here. And this is the, okay. Okay, I will stop here. So all this that you listened, basically he was right here, just like the first 3 verses, right? And let me plug this again. So this is again, if you are not initiated in the discipline, you won't really know the differences. There are very big differences. For example, Maliki versus Maliki. So you have a short vowel and a long vowel, which makes a difference in the meaning. So one is king, one is owner. That's a textual difference between the two. There's another which is Maliki. Okay, there's another form also of a king, which is very different also from the script. There's one which Malikun liyawmi. There's an additional particle here, which is also different from the script. So as you can see, there are other variations which are dialectal, or it's not obvious here, but he said al-Rahman, for example. That's what we call A to E shift. A, for example, yeah. So let's say the famous, also those of you like, for example, wad-duha, that's one of the last. Wad-duha wal-layli idha saja. So if you listen to Hamza Zayyat, You'd say وَالضُّحِي وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجِي مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلِي. So instead of the you would have a. So these are also exhibit different variations in the dialect, okay, between. Again, the question again, did the Prophet recite this way? Did he recite a or a? Or did he recite both of them? We don't know. Even the information we have from the classical sources, actually, they don't tell us how the Prophet recited. We don't have any information whatsoever how the Prophet was reading. We only know that he was reciting what Gabriel was revealing to him, and then he would assign reciters to read in front of him, and he would approve or disapprove. Right? So there are other disciples who would read in front of him and say, okay, good, and that's it. Or no, that's bad, or repeat it, etc. But he wouldn't himself sit down and instruct people, and this is a lengthening of vowel, or this is a genitive, or this is a nominative. These things did not exist back then. Okay? So these are, in a sense, dialectal variations also have to do with particles. There are more textual variations which are more problematic. Okay? So again, as I told you, you pick up a mushaf, you pick up a Quran. This is the standard reading that we have right here. And sorry, I don't have the English here, but again, there's no need for the English because I want to show you something very specific. So this is a codex, which are all both Quran. You can both get them. So you can go to Mecca, and then you can get the Quran based on this tradition, and you can go anywhere else, and you pick up the Quran from this tradition. And you find here, this is from Surah At-Tawbah, right? So this is one chapter in the Quran, and then what you find right here is this one right here versus this one, okay? So this is exactly the same verse, but then in this tradition here, in this codex, you have an additional min, additional preposition. Again, you don't need to know Arabic to see that this shape here, there's something before it, which is right here, which is missing from here, right? And we are not here talking about a classical manuscript that is, you know, we're talking about Qur'ans printed nowadays, okay? So you pick up the Qur'an from that tradition, and you would find there are certain prepositions and particles which are not available in the other traditions. And these are very small. Sometimes they would change the meaning, sometimes they wouldn't. We are not talking here about chapters or verses missing or added. We are talking about probably typos in the first, you know, when the people were copying the different, you know, codices, and they were giving them, you know, to different multiple destinations. However, regardless of the origins of these, whether they were intentionally put there or they were typos, they became part of the tradition. So if you want to memorize the Quran and recite it based on the Meccan tradition, you have to basically say min tahtiha. Okay? If you are reciting according to the Kufan tradition, you drop the min, and then you change the case ending. Again, you say tahtaha, because otherwise it becomes a genitive. So you don't say min tahtaha, right? So you have min tahtiha or tahtaha. But again, the point here is you have a particle which is not there. Again, the question for us as a theologian, you want to think, okay, this is the word of God, this is the speech, this is how it was transmitted to the Prophet. Did God one day say min tahtiha and another day tahtaha, or was there one way, and then somehow the way the text was transmitted, it had problems in it, and we don't know exactly which one was. And then our job, and what Muslim scholars were trying to do in the past, you know, 1200 years, try to figure out, was there one reading more solid or more justified grammatically, you know, textually than the other reading, or both are equal? When they hit a dead end, or, you know, a wall, they would say, well, there is really not a big difference between this one and that one. So let's include them both. There's no harm. And you would have different legal scholars and theologians. They would say, well, as long as it doesn't really change the message, like the core of the meaning of the text, it doesn't really matter if I say from beneath or beneath. It's all the same. Okay? However, this is for exegetes, people who are writing commentaries on the Quran, people who are interested more in extracting laws from the Quran. They are not interested really. They are, of course, interested in the grammar, but they want to take information from the text. However, grammarians, they were very uneasy with that. Like, what do you mean it doesn't matter? Of course it matters to me. It's a particle. You are talking about a whole particle missing from the text. I can't just, like, you know, get rid of that particle and say, well, I will ignore it. And this is why you have this division between grammarians, Arabic grammarians, and theologians. Grammarians would challenge the system of the 7 readings. They would tell you, this reader, he didn't know enough Arabic. This reader doesn't know Arabic grammar very well. I don't accept the reading of Hamza al-Zayyat or al-Kisa'i because they didn't really study grammar with Sibawayh, the great grammarian, right? And this is why if you go back to the theologians, they would respond to the grammarians, oh, you infidels, you are not, you are secular grammarians, you just care about your a, u, e, genitives, nominative, subjunctive. This is the word of God. Of course, it's a particle, doesn't matter. This is what God revealed to us. And this is very obvious. You read any work on exegesis in the Islamic tradition, and it's just like full of battles, between the grammarians and the, linguists with the theologians and the exegetes, because they both have different, agendas or different, quickly, let's see, how much time do we still have? We're just like maybe 5 minutes, can I? Okay, yeah. So I will quickly go over just one of the problems that we have in the discipline of Quran, what we mean by Quran, what we mean by qira'at. There's a misconception that the Quran, that the written codex, the Quran in its original form, it means the recited thing, right? It's from qara'a, to recite in Arabic. So originally the Quran was meant to be recited. It is not meant to be written down and people would read it from the text. It's meant to be orally recited. There are different rules, complicated rules for reciting it. And there is a big difference between the Mus'haf, which is the codex, the written word, and the recited word. There are things that are in the written text that cannot be captured there are things in the recited form that cannot be captured in the written form. And I will give you a quick example here from, this is from the chapter of Joseph at the end right here. If you study recitation properly, where is that? This word here, for example, again, you don't need to know Arabic. You see a circle right here, okay? And this word, it's لا تأمن, okay? And it's in Arabic grammar, again, there's a problem here because according to Arabic grammar, it should be, there's an additional noon which is missing, an additional n. So there should be another tooth there, So you see there's a little notch here, tooth. According to the rules of Arabic grammar, there should be additional one. There should be another one here, but it's not, okay? So the word should be ta'manuna, tununa. However, it is written in the text with one n. So reciters were also uneasy with that. So what do we do with that missing n? So what they did is they put a circle right here, okay? And they said, okay, well, we have to stick with the script. We can't change it, okay? This is how the companions codified the Quran. So what we do is we say, we recite ta'manna. So if you look at me, na, okay? However, I move my lips and I make a shape of u, but I do not pronounce u. Okay? So I say basically, مَا لَكَ لَا تَأْمَنَّا. Right? And that's how you do it properly. Okay? So, and these things cannot be captured by just reading the text. Okay? So you have to study that with a master. Okay? And there are many of this. This is in Arabic we call ishmam. That's one of the rules of recitation, which means you give the scent of one letter to another letter, or one vowel to another vowel. And you don't want to say مَا لَكَ لَا تَأْمَنُّونَ because the u, it doesn't exist in the text. The text is sacred, right? So you play around, you do a trick, and you are not touching the script, okay? But you are telling the audience, you are telling the person who is listening to you, wait, this is Arabic grammar is there. I'm not like really getting rid of Arabic grammar. So look at my lips. I know that there is a u there, but it's not in the script, okay? So let us both be happy. I'm happy. And reciting as the text as it is, you are happy as a grammarian because you want an u, so I'm giving you an u. Okay, and for those of you who are not Arabists, this is really very important. A, u, e in Arabic is extremely important. So that's not last thing I want to also show you here is this is an interesting session that is only done recently in the Muslim world where. Usually, reciters are men. Okay, you don't have women reciters. You only have women reciters who study with women, and men, of course, study with men. So there's segregation in a sense that women cannot study with men. And I came across this when I was, of course, reading the biographical entries of the reciters. Why don't we have women who are reciters? Okay, you have women who can actually, they are legal scholars, you have biographies for them, women who transmitted prophetic traditions, there are many of them, but we don't have women reciters. And then, of course, because there are problems in women sitting in public and teaching men something like that. And then you need a long time to teach the Quran. Unlike, for example, you are transmitting one prophetic tradition, it takes you a minute. You know, just like you go then and then you put a veil between you and the man, and then, okay, teach me this tradition. The woman will write it down, and then she will go, and that's it. However, in the Quran, we are talking about 6,000 verses, and you need physical space. It's like one-on-one mentoring, and then you need a long time to study with that person. So unless that person is, you know, a relative, a father, a cousin, you know, a brother, a woman really can't just like go and spend 7 or 8 years at least. You know, if you are smart, you finish the Quran in 5 or 7 years as an adult. So this is an interesting thing that came. This man, he's Syrian. He's now one of the really top reciters of the Quran, Ayman Suwaid. His name is Ayman Suwaid. He has what we call a shortest chain of transmission between him and the Prophet, according to his certificate, basically. But what I want to show you here is these women who are here. So you have this woman here, and this setting is really something very new. Like, you don't find ever in the historical sources women sitting and reciting in front of a group of strangers to do this, but they are trying to change things slowly. So this basically is, these are the committee, and she is reciting based on one reading, and they will certify her at the end. You know that, you know, you basically recited, there are no mistakes. Sometimes there are mistakes, and I will tell her, fix this or fix that, and then they will give her a certificate, and you are certified. And this is very unusual in a sense that classically, usually men give certificates to men, and women give certificates to women in the discipline of Quran or Qira'at. Not in other disciplines. And this setting is new. And of course, if you are interested, like if you're an anthropologist, you will see that the men will never look at the woman in the eye, you know, because they were just like, they were only listening, so they will not look at her or anything like this. So that's, there are other things I can, you know, talk about, but that's mostly it. I hope I, you know, just like gave you a little bit of, you know, what is this discipline about, what we mean by variant readings, what are some of the problems there, and I'll be happy to take any questions or comments or, yeah, so thank you so much. Yeah. Yes, okay, so this tradition, there's someone who, I think, Etan Kohlberg wrote an article on that. And that's not the case here, but there is, like, this is mostly in the Sunni tradition. I didn't talk about the Shia tradition, it's very different. The Shia do have something similar to that, and the article is based on that, where there is a word written, but then you completely, just like even you read it different than the consonantal text itself, right? So this is similar to that tradition. You have to follow the consonantal outline. You change the vowels. So M-L-K, you have to still stick with M-L-K, but then you can say ma or me, but M is there, right? So, but you can't, for example, M-L-K change it to, you know, Adonai, right? Or, you know, so you have to, you know, stick to the consonantal text, but the vowels change accordingly. So the vowels, you are free to change the vowels, but you cannot change the consonantal outline. Consonants stay, vowels change. Right. But the vowels also, you are not completely free to change the vowels. You have to follow a certain system. You can't just say, oh, well, I do actually like this kind of voweling because it will give me a new meaning. And this is what many scholars try to do, and then other scholars will come after them. No, wait a minute, how did you come up with this reading? You can't just like make your own, you know, reading, and you have to follow what your master taught you. And then if you read in the biographical dictionaries, sometimes people come up with a reading that people are not familiar with. And then someone will say, oh, go to this person, ask him, who taught him this reading? And then the other person will say, oh, sorry, I made a mistake. Or he will just like say, someone taught me this way. So it's the tradition is different than that, but there are some groups of, they are mostly esoteric Muslims who don't want to stick to basically one form, and then they will read it in another form. But the tradition, the Orthodox tradition, is basically sticking to the consonantal outline and following it without reading it in another way. Yeah. Did I answer your question? More or?
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to both.
They do both. Okay.
Yeah, because we're just saying these are scribal errors.
Scribal, yeah.
This tradition that goes back saying that.
Here they will not say it's scribal errors. They will just like say there are no. So this is not a Masoretic text, right? So this is a Masura, if you want, in a sense. But before that, it was just a consonantal outline.
Right.
And then the readings emerged due to the fact that we do not have vowelings.
Right.
So out of different systems of voweling, we have 7 different Masoretic texts, if you want. And you stick to those. Yeah. Yes, please. Yes.
When I heard from you saying that the Quran was initially supposed to be just to read, not to read the Bible. Right. But then during what I understand also from the Prophet's time, they were written, the Quran was being written also at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So are you suggesting that there are interpretations of that, or that is the interpretation? How do you clarify that?
Okay, so first, let's see. If we go back to the dictionary, right, and then we want to go to the root QR Hamza, qara'a, right, and then you look at the word qara'a in pre-Islamic Arabic, how it was. Qara'a means to connect things together. It has nothing to do with reading, right? And then the word to read became that you connect the letters together and then you read, right? So this is how the etymology of the word, came to be as to read or to recite, right? Now, yes, we do have accounts from the time of the Prophet that he had also scribes, right? Kuttab al-Wahi, as we call them. He had scribes and they were writing down verses. And we do have accounts saying that they were writing them down on parchments, on stones, on sometimes he would, recite something and then someone would take notes. But we are talking here about a collection of the text together, ordering them, putting them in chapters, putting them in one codex. Yes, people probably have different ways of inscribing graffiti, for example. There are verses probably written, and inscribed on stones or leaves, which we don't have access to, but this is at least how it is described in the sources, right? So this form of writing existed, but in a very, very primitive way. It wasn't developed that, that you would basically use a consonantal script just to aid your memory, okay? So the verse is like that, and I'm just like taking notes how the verse is written. But a fully fledged Arabic script was not developed back then. There was no actual script. They were learning the script. They borrowed the script from Nabatean, from Syriac, trying to come out with different, Arabic script. And Arabic script developed in the 5th century, its consonantal outline. So writing was very, very minimal, and it's only accessible to people who are educated, elite, like the laity did not know how to read and write. They were heavily dependent on transmission. So when we say that the Quran is Quran, it is to be recited, it is to be basically recited, and people would memorize it like they were memorizing and reciting poetry. Poetry was not written back then. And we have thousands, if not millions, of poems transmitted in this way. We don't have any written records of poetry, but Arabs, this is how the tradition is. You would depend on your oral practices, memory. There were people who were their job description is a transmitter. That's what he does. He just memorizes things. He's like a recorder. He just goes around and then he transmits from people, and his full-time job is to memorize things. And the Prophet had these people. He had full-time transmitters who were actually with him most of the time, people like Ibn Mas'ud, Ubay bin Ka'b, Zayd bin Thabit, who were always around him. And these were the people who are or were responsible for transmitting the text for us. So yes, there were very primitive forms of writing, but we don't have any indication in the historical sources that the whole Quran was written in that period. No historian, no Muslim historian ever said that. They would say that they collected these different pieces of verses together and they wrote it down on sheets during the first collection. But to write down on sheets from the very beginning, everything is ordered, we don't have any records for that. So it's not my suggestion. This is how in the Muslim historians, they were describing the process of revelation and how the disciples of the Prophet were writing it down. sometimes he would tell them write it down. Sometimes they would just like write it down on their own. You know, they listen to something and then they write it down and then they want to memorize it or recite it. Did they answer your question? Yeah.
One of them that Muhammad did ask people to put one was...
Yes, we have this tradition. He would sometimes, you know, there is a tradition that would say, okay, well, this verse, put this verse before that verse, you know, I got a revelation that, you know, this verse should go. We do have these accounts, but these accounts are not used in the Muslim tradition, in the Muslim, basically, in how the Quran was collected. And we have a classification of these accounts. We have a hadith or tradition which is sound, which is weak, which is, you know, so. So this account is not in the official record of how the Quran was collected. And if we do have an account, if the Prophet already told people if he had a written Quran, so why do we have the first account? You know, like this account that the Prophet actually did have a prototype contradicts the fact that the first caliph collected the Quran. It also like if the Prophet already collected it, so why do we have another account saying that there was no collection of the Quran and the first caliph collected it? It's either this or that. You can't have both. So you either say that the Prophet collected the Quran, okay, and the other two accounts are fabricated, or that account is fabricated and those two accounts are correct. Both of these do not get together. Yes.
Regarding the Quran Hadith,
yes.
When the Prophet was revealing the Quran, did he say, this is Quran, but Hadith would be simply something that somebody heard say?
Yes, Hadith is developed later on, right? So it wasn't, you know, there was the concept of, you know, the Prophet saying something and then it became like a legal verdict that you have to follow. It's something that was that developed later on. So Hadith is a prophetic tradition. It is, there's again dispute whether it's inspired or not, but most people agree that the actions of the Prophet and his sayings that relate to relaying the message of Islam is also an inspiration from God. However, the main difference between Hadith and Quran is that Quran is the verbatim word of God. So the Prophet did not interfere in delivering the Quran. This is exactly how I heard it from Gabriel. Hadith is he formulated, this is his own words, right? So the content of the Hadith is sacred. You should act on it because it's inspired. The content is inspired, but the actual wording is not. And that's the big difference between Hadith and Quran.
So the people on basis of the social situation they were in would know this is Quran, this is Revelation, or...
Well, more or less, yes, and also there's a big difference in the wording. Like, you know, it's very easy to tell Hadith from Quran. Like, you know, if you're an Arabist or just like, you know, the language is very different. The register of language is completely different between Hadith and Quran. Like there is a group actually of Hadith, what we call Hadith Qudsi. There are like 40 of them or 45. Actually, the language is very close to Quran, but scholars classify them as Hadith Qudsi, and some actually argued that the wording is also inspired from God because the language is very similar to the Quran. But there was never, at any point in history, there was never ever a confusion between what is Quran and what is Hadith, including the Hadith Qudsi. There was always separation, and no one ever doubted that, oh, this Hadith or this wording, it could be Quran or vice versa. There was always a distinction between both sets. Yeah. Yes, please. Yeah.
I'm wondering during the first canonization, like what did it take for those additional three systems to be considered, you know, equal?
Politics again. So this man, Ibn al-Jazari, he also was connected with the court, and he forced actually the wazir to issue a fatwa. And this fatwa, basically the content of the fatwa is saying anyone who denies the sanctity of the 10 readings is considered a kafir, you know. And he actually forced the community back then to follow these 3 additional readings. So it's always politics, and if the reciter or the scholar is connected with the government or with the hakim or the wali al-amr, as we say, you can always force him to issue the fatwa, and the fatwa is binding. You know, and and this is why, again, many people didn't like that. But what do you do? So you have to follow the system. So again, in all these, if you see, there's a pattern where all the phases of the collection of the Quran and canonization, it's always politics. So you have the caliph himself is codifying the Quran, The first Ibn Mujahid, you know, he was connected with the court and he forced them to follow 7 systems. And then the same thing with Ibn al-Jazari, he also forced people to come up with the 10. And also al-Azhar. Al-Azhar is a governmental institution at the end of the day. It's also under, you know, under Egyptian government through al-Azhar. They said, okay, well, we are going to issue the first official codex, printed codex according to one reading to all Muslims. And it's always, you know, like now, even now, you can't just like, you can't be an independent institution and say, I want to print a Quran without the supervision of a group of scholars. You know, see, like it's very meticulous process, you know, for typos, and you have many people go over every single edition of the Quran to make sure that there are no typos or there are no mistakes. So, yeah. Yes, please, yeah.
About the Othmanic Codex and the collection of that. So that was happening a generation after Muhammad's death, or so. Yes. But if the Quran was transmitted directly to the community, to the whole community, and everyone had a sort of agreed upon recitation that everyone heard that was direct, and everyone had it memorized, then why did it need to be collected? Like, couldn't one person just write it down?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. That's the questions that we, again, that's the problem. The problem between, I mean, that's what we do, right? We are curious people. We are curious academics in general. We read what we have in the historical accounts, and we've had, oh, wow, that's a little bit bizarre. So yes, if the narrative is everyone memorized it, everyone is happy, why do we have these problems, right? Or why do we have this account if everyone memorized the Quran? What's the need for that? So again, the first, you know, answer would be, well, because of the Arab conquests. So they spread, and then you have new people coming to the new religion, and then they don't know Arabic well, and then people started memorizing the Quran, and then you have new mistakes, and then you have new grammatical mistakes because people don't know the language. Therefore, there was a need to standardize the text for the newcomers, right? So that's the interpretation, or that's why we need to standardize the text, right? Again, there are problems, again, with this hypothesis. It's like we are talking only about 30 years here. We're not talking really about 100 years or 200 years. Most of the companions of the Prophet were still alive. And we already know that even the companions of the Prophet, they were disagreeing amongst each other about certain verses in the Quran. I was talking to, you know, David today that we have Ibn Mas'ud, for example, very famous, you know, Qur'anist. He's one of the most influential companions of the Prophet. He, in Muslim tradition, he denied, for example, that al-Fatiha is part of the Quran. He said this is not part of the Quran. He denied the last 2 chapters in the Quran to be Quran. He said, oh, these are not. They are just like supplications. They have nothing to do with the Quran. I don't have them written in my own codex. So if you read more in Islamic sources, you will find contradictions. So what we try to do is we read all these different, you know, accounts, and then we try to either solve the contradictions or understand why did people write these different accounts and what was happening in their mind. So yes, it's exactly as I agree with you. It's like we do have a problem between the idea that everything is transmitted perfectly fine, but then on the other hand, you have these accounts. So why do you need to collect the Quran if everyone memorized it? So there's something off here, and this is what you try to do. You try to understand which narrative is correct. Both of them may not be correct. Go to other accounts and see what's happening, and then historians try to synthesize this and come up with a more practical picture of what was really happening back then. Yes, please.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
I'm curious about other Arabic poetry, like outside of the Quran, and it might shed some light on this issue with grammarians. In English, you know, we know that there's this long history of poets messing with words in non-grammatical structures to create like rhyme and meter.
Yes.
And is that something that exists outside of the Quran in the Arabic poetic tradition?
To basically manipulate the language to serve grammatical purposes, more or less. Yeah. Okay. Well. Okay. So this is a little bit complicated. Why? Because the Arabic grammar did not exist at the time when we had Arabic poetry, and even during the time of the Quran, right? So Arabic poetry existed, let's say, 200 years after that. Okay. So of course the language existed, the rules were there somehow, but they were not standardized, right? And the poetic tradition is also very complicated because there are so many problems in pre-Islamic and early Islamic poetry in terms of variants. Also, Arabic poetry is rich with variants. So you will have one poem, and then you will go to another source, and you will find different variants of the same poem, which means also there are different transmitters transmitting the same poem, which is exactly what was also happening with the Quran, because the Quran at many points in history, especially at the early period, it was always compared with poetry, right? And even the Quran itself was always trying to defend itself. You know, the Prophet was always saying, I'm not a poet, I'm not a poet. Stop telling me I'm a poet, right? And this is why, again, the Quran said, well, you are not a poet. You know, stop, you know, don't freak out. You're not a poet. You are a messenger from God. And it's always, you know, the pagans were coming after him. What's this thing you are saying? You're just like a poet. You're not a prophet, right? So it's always this poetry versus Quran. It's very obvious throughout. Like read almost, you know, I would say everywhere in the Quran, not everywhere, but just like it's ubiquitous. The whole theme of Quran being poetry, rhyming in the Quran, the structure of the Quran, it's very similar to poetry. And grammarians, to standardize language, they relied on two sources, Quran and poetry. So, but the grammarians trusted poetry more than they trusted the Quran. And that's why the theologians and exegetes, they came after them. It's like, oh, you bad people, how could you not take the word of God to be the perfect grammar? You know, and they would say, well, what do you are saying, you know, here, let me show you something very quickly, sorry, here. So talking about al-Fatiha. So this is one of the things that is it right here? Yeah, so this is one of the things that I'm working on, and this is just from the first chapter. So you see here the endings here. So this is grammar, right? So you have do, you have E, right? And you have also do here, but different. All these, let me just actually zoom out, right? So you don't have to see the exact word, but here I'm listing basically, I have 14 pages of variants that I collected from possibly 25 sources of just the first chapter of the Quran. They're all grammatical, right? And some of them actually, they have no transmitter. It's just like grammarians playing around. You know, just like saying, oh, well, this could be actually recited this way. It could be recited that way. So yes, the answer to your question is Arabic grammar did not exist, and grammarians later on relied on the corpus of Arabic poetry and the Quran to standardize Arabic grammar. They succeeded, you know, to a certain extent. Poets later on, after the period of standardization, they did play around with poetry to come up with new structures. So it was probably the other way around, in a sense. Yeah. Yes, please.
You spoke about the forms of gestures.
Yes, yeah.
And I was wondering how female reciters handle that if their faces are covered during the recitations.
We don't know. I don't know as a man. So probably especially with women, you know, they would do that, I guess, if they are doing it professionally. You know, there is also in Quranic recitation, you have different levels, you know. So you have the basic, what we call tajweed, okay, and you don't go through this process. You are not meticulous. You just like learn the basic stuff in tajweed. You do it in high school or maybe early college. You only learn how to assimilate letters, how to properly pronounce. You don't go through the rigorous process of recitation. If you are doing it professionally, like you are doing a certificate, you have to do these gestures. There are other gestures, for example, of the glottal stop. So sometimes you have to knock on your chest, for example. You say, ah, you want to say an ah, and then you can't say an ah because there's a very long vowel before it. So you just like do like this. I do want to say an ah, but I can't, you know. So there are other gestures in there. I don't know how women do it because, you know, I've never been there, but I assume if they are doing it professionally, like it would be the same as men. So it's not going to be that different between both of them. Yes, please, Dave. Yeah.
I had a question about tajweed,
yes.
moving diversification of records. And I'm wondering, do those kind of concerns that recur at every stage of the process as you get, for example, like front precedence and ornamentation, they're kind of like, I don't know. I'm just wondering if that goes on and on and on.
Okay, so you mean the numbering of the verses, right?
Well, I mean, putting in the manuscript,
yes.
The verse separator.
Okay, yeah, the verse separator.
And so there's discussions about that we've talked about in the book a little bit, I think. And so you have this tradition of people who are against it.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering if concerns about the written elaboration of the written text continue. Like, is there continuous? Every couple generations, like
yes, yeah.
There are people who.
Of course, I mean the verse separators. So they are different from one tradition to another tradition, right? So let's say the numbering of the verses, let's say in the Kufan tradition is different from the Medina tradition. So let's say and also where you put the stop, right? So let's say in Al-Fatiha, for example, you go the Medina tradition, they put the verse marker in the last verse earlier. They all agree that it's 7 verses, but they put the verse marker differently. So if you count the number, they tell you in the books of manuals of Qira'at, right? The number of the verses of this chapter is, let's say, 115 in the Kufan Codex, 113 in the Medina Codex, which means that they were actually doing separate work in putting the verse markers, you know, in both cities, right? So that's one. 2, there were earlier, how it is described in the manuals, that there was, yes, exactly, opposition from Muslim scholars. They don't want to add anything to the Quranic text except the text itself, the consonantal outline. So they opposed verse markers, they opposed the Bismillah even, in the name, like Bismillah Rahman Rahim, the opening verse. Many people actually, like there are different schools that they say this is not part of the Quran. It's only part in Surah Al-Naml, as we said, but it's not part of every single chapter. It's not. There are 2 schools in law. They say it's not part of every chapter. And if you listen to the Quran in Hamza Zayyat again and Al-Kisai, you would hear the whole Quran and they would skip the Basmala. They would just like connect one chapter to another chapter and skip the Bismillah between, which again tells you that they didn't want to add the Bismillah because they said it's not part of the Quran. Again, what we call the tahzib or the ta'shir, you know, and you know they put the, you know, how to divide it to quarters and halves. These are all later on, and they were using different colors. So they would say the whole thing is in black, and then if they even want to add the vowels, they would put it in red or in yellow or in green, and same with the tahzib, you know, with the different markers. So even until today, like this is, I mean, you see the Quran and then you see the different colors also of it. They will tell you, well, this is the consonantal outline, this is the Quran, and the other colors we are using are not Quran. These are human intervention, you know, to a certain extent. And there's, again, until today, opposition to reform the script. You know, this is why we have a dagger alif, you know, because we don't want to write hadha with a long alif, because this is how it is written in the Quran. And we are still, in modern standard Arabic, we have to write hadha without, you know, the alif, relying on that. So there's no even, like until now, there's opposition to write the Quran according to the modern spelling system of modern standard Arabic, and they will stick to it. Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, no alif, because this is how it is written, and there's no even discussion in changing that. It's just set, and this is how it is, and people got used to it. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Just quickly, on the first kind of the last talk, I think it was Joseph.
Yes.
The men and not having the men, like having the men in
the men, the moon.
Yeah. Well, in the verse that had the ones, the men.
Yes.
The 2 readings are synonymous.
They are the same. There's no difference. It's just the meaning is the same. There's no difference in the meaning. It's just, you know, there's it's if you skip a noon, there's a difference between la ta'manna. This is a. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. I thought you were la ta'manna. The meaning is the same. Both of them, yeah. من تحتها and تحتها. The meaning is the same, yeah. Yeah. No, I already said that. The meaning here is from beneath or beneath it. And then, of course, you would have some grammarians who will tell you there's a subtle difference, but the meaning is the same. So there's not a big difference between the 2. There are other verses which are very similar, but the meaning is different, you know, especially when it comes to prefixes. For example, sometimes you would have, let me think of something.
Something like in or with, or
yeah. I mean, you have. Let's see. The numbering is exactly. You have 52 or 53 verses, which have different readings, and based on that readings, the count is 53. It's by Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi, and you have different legal rulings based on these differences. So even the differences also in the variation, it will also affect the legal ruling of that. Okay. There are verses in like the divorce, will, some variations, passive, active. For example, there's a huge discussion in I think Fakhruddin al-Razi, probably like 7 or 8 pages. You know, أعوذ بالله من شر الفلق من شر أعوذ بالله من شر ما خلق. Okay, so that's in Surah Al-Falaq. من شر ما خلق. Okay. And then, so did God create evil or evil was created? So you have one reading, من شر ما خلق, that God created evil. And then you have the other reading, من شر ما خلق, and they read it in the passive, from that which was created. And then you have a whole theological discussion. Evil is created or God creates evil. And that's basically a meaning for theologians, very important. You will say, well, it doesn't really affect the meaning. Evil is created anyhow. But for theologians, it's very important to understand whether God can potentially, he is able to create evil or not. So there are readings that exhibit differences in meanings, and those meanings, some of them are like really very small, some of them are big. There's no verse, there's no variation that will completely change, you know, the whole, oh, this is like theologically, it's just like completely different. Or like Islam talks about A, and then suddenly in another verse, you would say like Islam completely talks about different things. No, it's just there are legal changes, some theological changes, grammatical changes. Many times, probably I would say 50% to 60% of the variants, they are just grammatical and phonetic. Yeah. Yeah, someone else? No, oh, okay. So, David?
Is there one over here?
Oh,
okay. So yeah, this is pretty technical now, but I think in one of the chapters, the chapter you wrote review the standards.
Yes,
you're dating for the chapter. Yeah, and you ended up putting it in the, as I recall, like the 7/10 or 20-something.
Yes. Yes, yeah.
So for me, I mean, what was interesting about it is that it kind of corresponds to some of these alternative datings of the collection to al-Husari period.
Yes.
And I wonder what you think of those, of the redating of the continental text al-Husari.
Yeah, I think the tawatur, no, it wasn't the tawatur, it was, I think, the accounts of collecting the Quran.
Yeah. Okay,
they were, yeah, exactly, the dating of the, like these accounts, I think we could safely assume that they could be dated to the period of the late 8th century, or like 700s, 90s,
yeah,
right?
So like early Umayyad period.
Exactly, right. Yeah, which is also very, I think, very also from a political perspective, it's very possible because Zuhri, he is the person who was responsible, who was the only one, Zuhri, and who was also hired by the Umayyad court to write these accounts or to transmit these accounts of the collection of the Quran. So Motsky, in his article on the collection of the Quran, he traced all the accounts of the collection of the Quran from different sources. And all of them, they go to basically one point, which is Zuhri. So basically, you either have to believe it's Zuhri, or you say he made them up. There's no third option here. You don't even have another source from another person besides az-Zuhri who is, you know, transmitting this, which tells us that yes, probably by the Umayyad period, when they were trying actively to come up with the dotting system, and al-Hajjaj and Abdul Malik, and all these people, that they were actively trying to standardize even the tradition of writing the Quran, of codifying it. So it was hand in hand, writing down the Quran, standardize it, and then trying to come up with a narrative that how, you know, we came to the stage of dotting the text. And you really needed, you know, narratives about how Abu Bakr was collecting it and how Uthman. So yes, I think all these narratives and the earlier attempts to dot the Quran, they all go back to the Umayyad period from Abdul Malik's time. All the evidence goes there. It makes sense also. This is like the beginnings of the, you know, Islamic/Arabic, caliphate. You need to standardize the constitution, and you start with the most important document in this, which is, you know, the Quran, and how, you know, it was transmitted to the community. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, please. Yeah. Yes. The scholar becomes Ijaza. Oh, yes. That's
And then there are different variations of that. Like
this one, yeah?
I wonder if you can give the variation of it.
Variation of what?
Variations of from Jibril and
Oh, there are different traditions. Some of them don't have, for example, al-Lawh al-Mahfuz and the pen. It would say Jibreel right away. Some of them would say prophet from God, you know, directly. But all of them, they agree, they go back to the prophet. And it's either you would have this all fixed. All of them, they would follow the same pattern in the Ijaza, right? The variation would be basically in this part. But it's either you skip al-Lawh al-Mahfuz and the pen, or you go directly the prophet from God, Rabb al-Izzah, or you know. So it depends on you have, I would say, Egyptian tradition, North African tradition in the, you know, Ijaza form, and you have a Shami tradition, which is in Syria, and they have sometimes different, you know, technicalities in writing the Ijaza, but all of them more or less, they follow the same system. So there aren't really big differences in terms of you know, it's a standard formula, right? He studied with an. It's basically the same formula. This is Egypt. Abdul Basit Abdul Samad. He is this is an Azhari tradition in a sense. And again, probably within the Azhari tradition, you would have different masters. Let's say you could be an Azhari who studied in North Africa, let's say. And you could be an Azhari scholar, but then your master is Moroccan, right? So you would probably have, you know, a different, you know, ijaza, but more or less would agree on that. Yeah. Yes?
It seems like with the various scholars who came up with the system of 7 or the system of 10, I'm wondering if their sort of opinions on that, are they based on like chain of transmission? And I have evidence that, or I think that this one is can be better traced to the Prophet, or do they have like theological arguments about like this reading is more in line with like Islamic theology or what I think the theology of the Prophet was?
Okay, so this is basically,
where is it? This is the criteria, right? Right here. I didn't discuss that. I discussed it at length, you know, in other. So the criteria is more or less, I would say, objective, not subjective, right? So you don't have, you know, if what the Muslim community agreed on, starting with Ibn Mujahid, is that we need these three, the first three first. I will talk about the fourth later on. These three must apply to any reading that you want to be considered as canonical or standard. One, it has to agree with the consonantal outline, right? So if you have a codex, one of those 5 codices, right? And then you have a reading, you know, let's say your master said instead of mim M-L-K, N-L-K. No, you can't do N-L-K. You have to follow a reading which follows M-L-K consonant. And the voweling, we will talk about it in number 2, right? So the first important thing is it has to agree with the consonants, okay? You can't come up with a reading outside the consonantal form. The second condition is it has to adhere to Arabic grammar. Again, and this is a point of contention, what Arabic grammar? Okay, post-Sibawayh, before Sibawayh, Basri grammar, Kufan grammar, Hijazi grammar, there are different dialects and different grammar. And then later on they said it has to agree with one form of Arabic grammar, right? So you can't come up with a reading with lahan or solecism or a grammatical mistake. If it's a subjunctive, it's subjunctive. Okay, you can't just like make an a-o. Even though we do have variation on this, and grammarians will come up with interpretations. So in this case of, for example, alhamdulillah, you have alhamdu, they will tell you, okay, that's an u, it's nominative. And then alhamdi, oh well, there is a missing preposition. They will tell you, it's, you know, like there is an omitted nabda'u bilhamdi or something like that. Yes, yeah, that's, yeah. And that's, so it's, they will come up with interpretations based on a form of Arabic grammar. However, there are readings which completely you cannot justify. No matter what you do, there are readings that are ungrammatical. Third one is what we call sound transmission or isnad, meaning that you cannot come up with a reading without a master who did not teach you that reading. So this is why if you go and recite something, they will come after you. Okay, who taught you that? And then, oh, this person. And then they will go to that person, and then they will say, okay, did you teach him this? He would say yes. Now, what if this person is dead? Which is, you know, the case. So they would go to other students. Let's say this master had 10 students. So they would go to these 10 students, and then they would compare the things that they transmitted from this master, and they will say, okay, 8 of them, they say this, 2 of them, they say, 8 say X, 2 say Y. The 8 win. And then those 2 are weak. We don't follow them, we follow the 8. Okay, so it was a rigorous, you know, process. The fourth one is what we call ijma', is consensus. It means that the consensus, like the community at a certain point, and this was very early, that the whole community or the majority of the community agreed to read in this way. But then it was really not practical to follow this, because even within one community, such as Kufa, you had 3 different readings. So what are we talking about here? And this is why the element of ijma' was started at the beginning to be prominent. And then you would say, well, this is how the community reads. But then it was not practical. And then this is why they switched to number 3, where you started to have sound chain of transmission, and then the Quran reciter started to follow the rules of hadith criticism. You know, like I have to see if this reader Is fiqh trustworthy? You know, is he a good Muslim? Does he drink wine? Is he, you know, whatever? So you would find all these biographical, you know, details about them, trying to validate the chain of transmission. So more or less, the scholars would tell you any reading. If you have a reading, come. Okay, you have your own reading. Come. Let's basically check your reading according to these criteria. If it satisfies these criteria, you can have your own reading. And so far, according to them, only 10 readings fulfill or satisfy these 4 criteria, or first three criteria. Yep.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much.